Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wondered if cannabis use and feeling down are linked in your brain in a specific way? This new study dives deep into that question. So, we all know that cannabis use disorder, or CUD as it is often called, and feeling depressed can go hand in hand for a lot of people. It is a pretty common combination, but how does this happen in the brain? Are there specific brain networks involved that might be acting up in both conditions? Scientists are still trying to figure this out, and the research so far has shown mixed results. This is where our study comes in. The researchers wanted to look closely at how depressive symptoms might play a role in the relationship between cannabis use disorder and how different parts of the brain talk to each other when we're just resting. They focused on 4 key brain networks. Think of these networks as big teams of brain areas that work together. There is the salience network, which is like the brain's alert system, telling you what is important. Then there is the executive control network, which is your brain CEO, handling decision-making and focus. The default mode network is active when you are zoning out, thinking about yourself or the past. And finally, the basal ganglia network, which is heavily involved in reward and motivation. To investigate this, the researchers gathered data from 3 previous studies, bringing together a pretty good number of participants. They compared people diagnosed with cannabis use disorder to a control group who didn't use cannabis much. Then, they used a special kind of MRI called resting state functional connectivity, or RSFC for short, basically. This technique measures the brain's activity when you are just lying there doing nothing. It looks at how different parts of the brain are sending signals back and forth to each other when they're at rest, like observing which brain areas light up or become active at the same time. If they do, it suggests they're connected and working as a team, a network. They also measured how depressed people were using a standard questionnaire called the Beck Depression Inventory, or BDI. This questionnaire helps them understand the severity of depressive symptoms. Within the cannabis use disorder group, they also looked at how much cannabis people were using, like grams per week, and how severe their cannabis use disorder was based on diagnostic criteria. The big question was this: do people with CUD show different brain connections than controls? And does the level of depression change these brain connections or even interact with cannabis use to alter them? Now, for the big findings, after all this detailed work, the study found something quite surprising, especially given their initial hypotheses. They looked at the differences between the CUD group and the control group in these brain networks, and they found, well, no significant differences. That means when they compared the resting state brain connections within these networks, people with CUD and the control group looked pretty similar. They also didn't find any direct link between the severity of depressive symptoms themselves, and these resting state brain connections regardless of whether someone had CUD or not. And importantly, they didn't find any interactions. This means that depressive symptoms didn't seem to change the brain connections that might be related to cannabis use disorder. And vice versa, they ran all these analyses across all the networks they were interested in, and pretty much across the board, the results were the same. No significant findings for group differences, no significant findings for depression scores, and no significant interaction effects. To be extra sure and to see if there was evidence for the absence of a difference, they also used something called Bayesian analyses. These analyses help quantify how much evidence there is for their findings, and in most cases, these Bayesian analyses provided moderate to strong evidence in favor of the null hypothesis. Think of the null hypothesis as the nothing interesting is happening here idea. So, the study found strong evidence that there weren't significant differences in these within-network resting state functional connectivity measures between the groups or related to depression severity. Interestingly, within the cannabis use disorder group, they did find that heaviness of use, meaning how many grams of cannabis someone used per week, was positively associated with the strength of connections within all the studied networks. This means the more cannabis people use, the stronger the connections seem to be in their resting brain networks. This is a finding that replicates previous work by the same group. However, they didn't find any associations between the severity of their CUD diagnosis and within-network RSFC. And crucially, they found no interaction effects between depressive symptoms and how much cannabis was used or the severity of the CUD. On the behavioral side, they did find that within the CUD group, depressive symptoms were associated with higher CUD severity, age of onset of cannabis use, and heaviness of use. However, after making adjustments for multiple comparisons, only the association between CUD severity and depressive symptoms remained statistically significant. This suggests the severity of the disorder itself might be more closely linked to depressive symptoms than just how much or how long someone has used cannabis. So, what does this all mean? The researchers hypothesized that depressive symptoms would interact with cannabis use, amplifying one another, and that those with both cud and higher depressive symptoms would show altered brain connectivity. But their results didn't support this. The absence of significant group differences within network RSFC suggests that this specific type of brain connectivity might not be a strong, reliable marker that sets people with cud and depressive symptoms apart from control groups. One key reason for this lack of findings might be the average severity of depression in their sample. While people with cud reported more depressive symptoms than controls, on average, these symptoms remained in the subclinical range. Many previous studies that did find depression-related brain connectivity differences often included individuals with a clinical diagnosis of major depressive disorder. So, it is possible that the level of depression in this particular study wasn't severe enough to cause noticeable changes in these brain networks. The study also acknowledges some limitations. The resting state scans were relatively short, which might affect the reliability of the findings. Also, the sample wasn't specifically recruited for depression symptoms, leading to that lower severity and combining data from different locations and scanners. While increasing sample size and generalizability can also introduce noise. Another important point is that they focused on within-network connectivity. Future research might find different results by looking at how these networks communicate with each other, which is called between-network connectivity. This is something they couldn't do with the current data due to technical differences across the studies. They also mentioned that other factors like sex, the specific age someone started using cannabis, and the actual type and potency of cannabis used might play a bigger role in explaining previous brain connectivity findings than cud and depression alone. In conclusion, this study didn't find evidence that within network resting state functional connectivity is a clear marker differentiating people with cannabis use disorder and depressive symptoms from those without. While depressive symptoms were linked to cud severity in their sample, the brain scan data didn't show the predicted interaction or direct effects. This doesn't mean there is no connection between Q depression and the brain, but it suggests that looking within these specific networks might not be the best way to find it. Perhaps individual characteristics, like how severe the depression is, how much cannabis is used, or even how networks interact with each other, are more important for understanding the neural underpinnings of this common comorbidity. Future research with more severe clinical groups and focusing on between-network communication or task-based fMRI might shed more light on this complex relationship. What do I think? This study is super important because it is rigorously testing specific hypotheses about brain networks and comorbidity. The fact that they found strong evidence for the null hypothesis in many analyses is actually a powerful finding in itself. It tells us where to stop looking, or at least that this particular approach isn't showing us what we thought it might. It highlights the complexity of cud and depression and the need for more nuanced research, perhaps looking at more severe clinical populations or different types of brain analysis. It's a reminder that science is all about carefully testing, and sometimes finding that the initial ideas don't hold up, which leads us to ask even better questions. If you found this breakdown helpful, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more explorations into the fascinating world of psychology and neuroscience. Let me know in the comments what research questions you'd like us to tackle next.